PhD ABD. My specialty is in victimology for coercive and high demand groups. I founded International Cult Awareness Month with the Freedom Train Project, which is the organization that I run. We provide victim assistance to people who feel harmed or exploited by a high demand group. Okay, so now we're going to get started. I would like to first start with our panelists here to just unmute yourself and give us a little background of your story, a very abbreviated version, and what inspired you to say yes to this webinar? What is one of the takeaways that you want to bring to us?
I think it's important to reach anyone and everyone possible and educating in a category that people aren't really educated in and push off to the side. So thank you, Tabitha, for giving us this opportunity. I'll just say my mom had a role in me escaping Twin Flames universe.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, who's next?
Hi, I'm Keely. I always like to participate when someone asks something from this group because I feel like there's just so much work that needs to be done. And as if I can help out, then I will do that. I just passed my 3-year anniversary of leaving TFU. I was in TFU for 3 years and had a bunch of different roles, culminating in various leadership roles until I left. I really hope that we can bring more awareness and education of coercive control to the public and get some laws changed.
Victoria, you're next on my list.
Sure. I'm Victoria. I think it's really important, especially for the victims or people who've had experiences, to get their voices out there. I'm really big at advocating for people who may not feel comfortable doing it, whether they're still in the group and their voices can't be heard, or I have friends that have left, but they're too scared to come forward. So for me, it's important to share my story, to raise awareness. As someone who used to be a true crime junkie, until doing the documentary, I kind of learned how even that can be exploitative in its own way. And I think it's important to focus on what matters and the victim stories rather than glorifying abusers and predators, because I think a lot of times the victims are footnotes in their own story. So it's just important for me to make sure that our stories are heard and can inspire change.
Lene, thank you.
Hi, guys. I'm Lene. I am inspired to help be a part of the education and be a part of the change, especially in these circumstances, because people do not understand. It's extremely frustrating as a survivor, and I know for the other survivors as well. Every one of our experiences are so unique. I think trying to find one streamlined way of doing things is difficult. So, I have different perspectives just like the others, and I think us just coming together and providing that education and experience from our unique perspectives to really bring awareness to the full spectrum of how these things work and how we can make changes to help survivors, to help people who are still in these high control groups, and at least help get them resources that we didn't have. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Paula or Luis, would you like to add in here?
Thank you for inviting me, Tabby. My name is Paula Hardy. I have an identical twin sister who is currently still an active member in the group, who has estranged herself from me and my family for about 5.5 years. I am here to learn. This process has broken down my perspective and idea of who I am, of human nature, and my interaction with the world and my interaction with my own family in such a beautiful way. I've tried to use this opportunity to get to know who I am better, and with the hope of learning how to help my loved one when and if she is ready to come home. I'm here to learn from all of these incredible women who went through so much when they were in the group, to show support for all of these incredible women and the family members who are secondarily affected. Like Tabby said, this type of abuse and coercive control doesn't just affect the folks that are directly involved, but it secondarily affects the loved ones that are there to support and who want to support their family members.
Thank you very much. All right, Luis, would you like to speak? And then also we did have Mrs. Gaida who's joined in. So if you would also like to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful as well.
Hi, I'm Louise. I am the mother of a current member. I am heavily invested in anything concerning this group. I have one daughter in and her twin sister, Paula, who is also heavily invested. So we just want to support in any way and again learn everything we can. Family, I love you all. You are all so strong and brave, and I have so much respect for you. I'm here for support and to learn. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. This is just wonderful. Okay.
I wanted to say, Paula, well said. Luis, like I said, you're my rock. I am so thankful that we met and continue to talk and converse to the survivors. You are so strong, and I feel so proud to know you. And I'm hoping that my child is strong as well and can one day, wake up and think for himself. I don't understand when someone is so loved by so many people. I don't understand why the doors are closed, I guess. I hope that one day they will be. I just want a little opening of conversation and really get to know Ray's journey if that's what he wants. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, everyone who's come and participated. Some of you have family members that are still in, or friends even that are still involved. So what I'd like to know is, as you were leaving, what made you realize that you needed to leave? Was it a mass exodus that was occurring and made you think about it?
I'll go first. There were a few moments throughout that would kind of cast doubt in my mind, but we were programmed that any negative feelings or doubts were blocks to be healed. So you question your own intuition. The, ultimate thing for me was when I think the crack started to show in the beginning of 2020 when they first made the announcement that they were pairing up the first round of people within the organization, pairing up couples. That really shook me to my core. And then 2 months later, they did another round, and I was part of that. At that point, I think that was the final moment for me of being told not only who I was supposed to love, but what my identity was sexually and my orientation, all of these core things that make up a person. That was really eye-opening to me. And I remember struggling still. I mean, I knew nothing felt right about it, but it opened my eyes to how much power I'd given away to these leaders, that they felt comfortable telling me they knew me better than myself, and that anything I felt was incorrect. And that was that I just kind of snapped out of it in that moment. I'll never forget, I was walking my dogs and it just kind of clicked. I was like, I've given them so much power to tell me who I am. And I can take that power back. That's not theirs. It never was. And it's mine. And so that was when I knew I had to get out, but it was how, because I was so afraid. They've ingrained it. Once you leave, you're choosing separation, you're choosing hell, you're choosing insanity, you're choosing to never have anything good or be loved. And so that was a real fear. I kind of gradually did it. I played along. I said, okay, I'll go get coaching and try to work through these blocks while I plan my exit. I started deleting my sensitive information within the open forum, anything that discussed my, childhood traumas or the person I thought was my twin flame. And the final step for me was I was going along with the coaching program. It came time to, I had to start coaching others. At that point, I could not continue anymore because I did not feel right trying to teach people the mirror exercise or coach them when I knew what it was doing to me behind closed doors and the abuse I was encountering. At that point, I had deleted everything I wanted out. I made that final decision. I think it took about 3 months from when I knew I had to get out to when I finally pushed the leave group button. It was just that moment of, this is not who I am, and they don't get to dictate that anymore.
Very powerfully stated. Would anyone like to go next?
Well, for me, Victoria and I were in the same second wave, but for me, I was so locked in because I was in the coach role and doing a couple other things too at once. It took Sarah Berman's first whole thing of exploiting students, the school that exploited students, for me to start realizing that a lot of what Jeff and Shalia were saying, from coaching to the open forum and to, I think it was called headquarters, that everything was different. It didn't work right away. I literally had to stop watching the classes, stop doing the mirror exercise. I even felt guilty when I was teaching about their teaching because it didn't feel right. It felt really wrong and empty. A big push for me was when they told me I was a man in a woman's body, because I personally had never felt that way. I have very close relationships with people that have experienced this, and I know the signs, I know what it feels like. So that was really alarming to me, and a point of fear of I didn't know how to get out because my brain still wasn't functioning to the level of you can just block them. So thank God for my mother. That's when she kind of came in, of not only because I made it to the point, the next step that they wanted me to, which was saying, oh, I'm actually a dude. I did do that in front of my mother. She's the one who said, is this you or is this them? And you can see that part of it in the docuseries. It made me think, because I wasn't trained in any way how to respond to that. So I told her after long thought of it was them. I broke down crying, and I was scared and didn't know how to get out and wanted out. I left her for a little while, and I actually went on YouTube and found a video, which is Dr. Lalalich's video of why people join cults. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm in a cult. It's true. I can't deny it at this point. It was a long process to get out. I have no concept of time, so I don't know how long it took for me to get out. All I know is I left in 2020 and blocked everyone. That's all I have of that.
Well, I'm glad that we are now unblocked. That's very cool. Good steps. Does anyone else want to share for that specific question, or shall we move forward? Okay, Lene, go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually left before Victoria and Jesse during that time of them starting to assign people and assign their genders and everything. I had a different experience because I was more on the MAP side, the mind alignment process, and his little spin-off business he had with that. What really got me to get out of it was the fact that they were trying to operate in this mental health realm, seeking out military members with trauma who have seen things that I know Jeff has never seen, nor does he have experience with. He's trying to apply his mind alignment process onto these situations without any background and education in that. It started becoming an ethical thing for me. Like, I don't want to be involved in this. And if I would state that, if I would say, hey, this isn't the direction I think, of course, I'm not allowed to say that. I got to go heal my upset. I have a block. And I'm like, no, I have a legitimate concern from an ethical standpoint. And just being written off like that was disgusting. He's supposed to be a leader here, and I'm watching him abuse people. I'm watching him say horrific things about people who are coming to him thinking he has this cure for something they've dealt with forever. It made me so depressed, and I hope she's in here, but I invited my old team lead when I was working at the state health department. One day I called her in my office because I was at work. I was having a breakdown, and she was like, what is going on? And I had to tell her, I think I'm in a cult. I don't know what to do. Her eyes got so big, like, what do I do with this information? It had just come to a boiling point, one thing after another, me blocking out my family members, people who are so close to me. I was just cutting them off. That was so unlike me. I was just acting very out of character, and it was just final straw for me.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that it's good to hear that. I think for Mrs. G, who wants to know how that process works, what's going on for people cutting people off, what is happening in their psyche. Keely, would you like to share? The follow-up question for this is, if there is anything that you can start if you're going to share, but if there is anything that maybe would have turned your exit light on sooner.
I'm similar to you, Dr. Chapman, because it wasn't just one thing. And I think some people are disappointed Like they're like when they ask me like what made you leave, and like I could talk about it for an hour. So many things happened, and it felt like I was on a train and the brakes weren't working. I felt completely out of control of my choices, who I was, what I was doing, and what was being done to people and me. I was in a toxic, abusive, violent relationship that was being dismissed completely. And I knew that the other couples were in very similar, if not worse, situations, hospital visits and things like that. Of course, having watched Seduced and The Vow kind of backfired for me, or for Jeff, I guess, but that was part of my kind of awakening, and just seeing the results of these pairings, how unhappy and miserable everybody was. And then like the switch in the open forums, or when they would talk to Jeff and Julia, they would have to pretend that they were happy. Being a coach, I knew the truth. So as much as they felt comfortable telling a coach in that position. But yeah, the golden child thing was really intense and over the top. There were just so many things. It's like my worst nightmares were all coming true. I actually ended up having one of the worst nightmares I've ever had in my life a couple of months before I left. I just couldn't understand why my mind was filled with all of these dark thoughts and all of these horrible feelings in my body, and like there's just something's not right. But it did, kind of like what Jesse was saying, it took me forcing myself to stop watching the classes and stop doing map and the mirror exercise, and like forcing myself to actually question and critically think again. But it was really hard. It's like I lost my ability to critically think, and I'm still regaining that. Once I did that, I did want to stay longer. I sometimes have regrets. Like I wish I had stayed longer so I could have gathered more information and done more detective work. But at the same time, I felt so scared, like, oh my God, these people really are criminals. They're really dangerous, and I need to get out of here as fast as possible. But I had to also figure out how to get out of the relationship that I was in. Took me a couple more months after I left. Lots of different obstacles. I think that's part of what makes it hard for people to leave. I wish that there were so many different policies in place that would prevent anyone from being trafficked, whether that's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, in the context of what we went through. It's not so black and white like other cases might seem, but all of the same elements are there. I wish that gender coercion was criminalized. I think if that was, I think we probably wouldn't even be here, hopefully. But yeah, I'll let other people add to that.
Yeah. So we're going to get more into actual policy questions, but this follow-up question is, if you have an answer to it, what do you feel would have, and I'll answer it. Is there a thing that you feel like could have helped earlier?
I think for me personally, like better education, even in school systems, about, even though since I've worked a little bit in the school system, some things are a little culty in the first place. That's why you're so used to the way things are. I feel like education and having actual resources that are seen and available and not hiding, because I feel like most of the resources, like when I first got out, my mom is the one who set up my first therapy session with, she was both sociologist and psychologist, PhD, but was specific to victims of cults. That was her trauma. She only focused on that. And I didn't know there was such thing as that. My very first session, I asked her a lot of questions about that before we actually moved in. Having those resources and knowing they're out there and knowing you're safe. More education and more funding for just getting out and feeling safe to get out, because you are so coerced into believing there is no way out, and the threats only get bigger the longer you stay. I know that part. So it would be great if there was seen, not invisible resources.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. All right, anyone else want to add, or shall we move on? This is the exit lane question, the earlier exit. So far, thank you, everyone, for sharing your story. I did realize I made a mistake in which I forgot to announce what Twin Flames Universe is. So there might be people on here who are like, these are all interesting stories, but what? Twin Flames Universe started as an online program that promised people they would be able to find their one true twin flame. I don't know personally whether that meant romantic or just a match in the universe. Initially, from what my understanding, again, I wasn't part of it, but all these wonderful people had some interactions. It was being able to be matched up with someone and be a guaranteed match that they were going to be the twin flame. Now, over time, and not a lot of time, over a small amount of time, the claims that were made became more demanding, more outlandish, until it got to the point where the twin flame matching process wasn't apparently working right. This program is ran by Jeff and Shalea. I don't know their last names, and not even important at this point, but it was ran by this couple, and their matching process wasn't working, or they weren't making enough money, whatever the case was. And so then they decided to hand out gender assignments to people that was not in alignment with how they felt with themselves or what their sex assigned at birth was. It just wasn't in alignment for many people. There are some people who did go through a gender reassignment process. Now, this group is still running. And so one of the emphases on these wonderful voices here is to take the attention off of the group that's running and put the attention on to the people who are recovering and doing all the good work to try to help people, so that there's more voices like this, and the people who are still under this twin flame spell can always know they have someone to come to. I think every one of us here in this room is open to that. I'm open to that, even though I'm not related to Twin Flames in any way. If anyone from Twin Flames that's still part of it does end up watching this, just know that at any point here, there's a safe space to turn. In this session, we are going to put in a list of resources because we are talking about domestic violence situations. So we are going to put in a list of resources for any of our viewers who are struggling through this content. But now we're going to move on to the next section, which is the meat of this, and which is about policy. Now, the United States doesn't have any policies to protect people against cults specifically, or what one might call a high demand group, a high control group. In some cases, when it's religious based, which this group kind of like swam into religion, those are called new religious movements. So there's nothing inherently illegal about these groups that form. Even coercive control is not considered illegal in the context of social organizations. In some states, coercive control is considered illegal in the context of domestic violence and in the context of intimate partner relationships. But it's not considered illegal, for instance, in parenting and child relationships. So there are areas in which our society currently doesn't tolerate coercive control, like intimate partner violence. And then there's areas in which our society does. And it's very frequently understood and expected that spiritual movements and religious movements is one of those areas in which we just, okay, well, you joined the church. So, and then people kind of turn an eye to that. And that's one thing that I'm hoping to change. So the next question is, in thinking about your journey, as you were going through your exit process, no matter which phase or wave you exited in, did the public response or the public experience, meaning how the public responded to anything you may have said or anything you may have heard, did that impede or did that help you in your process of leaving? For instance, I was on social media a lot, and so there was a lot of people who would make disparaging comments, not really, kind of stung a little bit for me. It didn't necessarily impede my progress, but it did kind of set me back every now and then, because I would like become very emotional about it. I'd be like, why do these people think these things, But then there were a lot of people who were extremely supportive of everyone involved. That carried me further along in my recovery because I felt supported, even in a world where I was fairly isolated. Did you find that you were more impeded by the public experience or more growth? And this could be after your exit and or after the documentary.
I guess for me, I left before a lot of it became really popular. I think the Vice articles had been written, but I left before the Vanity Fair article and, the podcast and stuff. So there wasn't like a huge public opinion at that point. I will say what helped and hurt at this in this weird dynamic way was I was part of the security team, which meant I just had to basically creep on people's social media to find out if they were disparaging the group. When I would read posts from people that had left and they're like, hey, I left I'm pretty sure it's a cult, or even like reading like Paula or Louisa's posts at that time, and like it was loving and it was supportive, like we care about our daughter, our sister, but like this is a dangerous group. Originally, like initially I'd get defensive because this is a group that I've become loyal to and I believe in, and I'm like, oh, they just don't get it. But then as I'm reading it, there's that part of me that's like, but they're not coming from a malicious place. Jeff and Shalia were telling us everybody outside, they're haters and they want you to suffer and they want to drag you in their insanity and blah, blah, blah. And then you see when the posts are sincere and it's not coming from a malicious place, it really it helped. I think it helped me wake up a little bit, because I remember having to compile a list of the things that they were saying and I had to write why they weren't true. Mm-hmm. And I was having a really hard time coming up with why they weren't true. And I was sitting there and I was like, but this is true. This is what's happening. And so there was that, internal struggle where I'm like, no, this isn't right. But I'm like, no, they actually have a point. And so I think, there's a lot of chatter, and now that all these things are out, there's a lot of people that have opinions on, how could you be so stupid? How could you be so gullible? And I don't think any of that is helpful. I think, victim blaming is never helpful, and it takes the onus off of the perpetrators, and puts all of the onus on the victims to know they should know better. But I think that when people have the education or the empathy to come at it and want to understand, I find that feedback, even if it's pointing out the negativity, it actually helps, propel you to want to get out quicker.
Yeah, thank you very much. Does anyone want to add to this?
When I first got out, I had an interesting run-in with a lot of ex-members, so there was a lot of whispers, and I also left, I don't know how far before the Vanity Fair, because Jeff and Shalia were pumping it up of fame, so I don't know where timeline-wise I left, but there was a lot of chatter. I guess there was a lot of other ex-members that supposedly were talking to Vanity Fair at the time, so for me it was really hard because of the ex-member group I had gotten a part of for a short time period, only a month, and left and never came back. But they worked still like Jeff and Shalia, and everything was still operating like a cult. So it felt weird because I had left a cult to leave a cult. And their banter, and I don't know if anything they were saying was true, but I had a lot of word of mouth from multiple ex-members and multiple people that had left a long time period ago or had left a year ago. And it was just interesting to hear the chatter and not know if it was truth or if it wasn't. And I fully agree with Victoria. The victim blaming doesn't help, which we got a lot of that after the docuseries.
Very helpful.
Yep.
I think it's important to highlight the fact that these things are occurring, and they do occur, because that also becomes a silent pain that we have to go through, right? If we don't highlight it. And these interactions are very important to us, but it's also important, the victim blaming and things like that affect us, but it's also important to understand that the very supportive, positive people, or at least for me, had a better effect. On the webinar that I just posted on my YouTube, just randomly got someone who's been interacting with me for years saying how proud they are of me, and it really touched me. So I can imagine how that also feels for all of you as well. Does anyone else want to add, or shall we move forward? Okay, so let's go into the real policy question. We're going to imagine that there are laws or policies that are specifically designed to protect individuals in situations like yours. We're going to imagine that these laws or policies already exist. This is sort of what we call in therapy the miracle question. So they already exist. What would that policy look like? So if you woke up and all these laws existed and you were fully protected and everything was better, okay, what would be the big change in our policy and law?
I feel like coercion being into law here, since Australia is already testing that out. That would be great to have that put in place, as that's just a small, honest step in helping protect victims, survivors of cults, and having, honestly, a law against cults, just cults in general and high control groups, and recognizing a cult for being a cult instead of making it into entertainment and something that is real and shouldn't be made to entertain, but made to educate.
Coercion. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, coercion is a form of violence. So it's threatening. Financial abuse is considered coercive control, controlling a human being basically without physically touching them. But the threat of physical harm is considered coercive violence. This can happen in any type of relationship, or it can happen in friendships, it can happen in groups, it can happen at the workplace, it can happen frequently and socially acceptably, unfortunately, happens in parent and child relationships. And that's actually usually where we get our first exposure to coercive control and how we find a way to make the coercion that's happening to us okay, because that's the relationship we had with our caretakers as we grew up. And that's a whole nother webinar, but that's just to kind of give you guys an idea of coercive control. Why, when we present these concepts of laws, people are like, I got spanked when I was a kid and I'm fine, that kind of thing, right? I got controlled when I was a kid and I'm a perfect human being. Right. When we talk about coercion, we're talking about basically everything right up until actual violence. These are ways to control people. There's lots and lots of books and papers and things like that written on them, but that's like probably the most layman that I can get it. And now we're imagining that laws and policies exist already. When you wake up, what are they? Go.
I would love for there to be a law that prevented, in any context, in any situation, like the systemic removal of someone's rights and freedoms without their informed consent, since coercion can be kind of invisible to the untrained eye. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, and I think there's like real evidence to show that there are specific patterns that play out across all these different contexts, and they're all like this. They're like the same tactics of manipulation and removal of freedoms. An overarching law would be great.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to this imaginary world?
I would just like to say right now I'm taking actual notes because last month I actually wrote a letter to Senator Kelly, our state senator who took the place of John McCain's, took his seat. I explained as well as I could, which isn't very well, Twin Flames universe. And I asked him, which I know he probably won't, but maybe his assistant or something will watch the documentary to explain it better. I want to see some kind of law that can protect people from something like this ever again. And so I asked him just to look into this documentary and that I am requesting help. I'm hoping he'll contact me, and if he does, this would be great to give to him. Because I don't want just a state law. I want the whole country, that it applies to every single state in the United States. That's what I'm looking for. I don't know if it's possible, but can't hurt to try, right?
In our last webinar, which was about policies, describing the process of making policies for our viewers, if you want to go check out the YouTube channel, generally to get things done at a federal level, you have to have a critical mass of states that are doing it. If you all feel so moved, not just the speakers here, but everyone who's listening and watching from now into perpetuity. Write a letter. That's one of the best things that you can do. And sometimes there's not a lot going on in some of the smaller town and municipalities plates, so sometimes they'll be like, oh, this is what you need and want done, so you'll be really surprised at how powerful letter writing can be. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Paula, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, before any kind of law can actually be enacted, it needs to be first clearly defined. And I think the issue with coercive control and cult policy is that a lot of those terminologies are not socially well defined, and they're also not scientifically well defined. And until those terms and behaviors can be clearly written down and described with a clear pathway on how those occur, there can't be policy. And so I think some of it first starts with understanding what exactly is it that is abusive, that is coercive, that is harmful to people who are involved in high control groups. What does high control mean? Because we all know the word cult is more of a buzzword than an actual legitimate terminology for these types of groups. At least the definition itself doesn't really match the totality of what socially encompasses what a cult is. And so I think first it's identifying what is abusive about high control groups, what makes it high control, and then clearly outlining that and then presenting that. I think there is a lot of clear definition when it comes to domestic violence situations, partner violence, and then also things like RICO laws specifically like in New York, which is another way to look at some of these organizations. Of course, not all high control organizations could be reminiscent of a criminal organization, and I'm not trying to create that parallel in any way. But some high control groups follow some of those same pathways. And so also, I think for people who are looking to understand what kind of pathway can you go to get abusive and high control groups prosecuted, is also understanding what else is out there that can be similarly used that maybe doesn't use those terminologies like high control or religious abuse or domestic or what have you, but things like the RICO laws that do exist, that do sometimes overlap. And then the other thing I would love to mention is, I think if we also look at some of the tactics in which these groups take the role of control in someone's life, in which the person who becomes abused gives their power and control away. And a lot of that is, I believe, related to a coaching world that is largely unregulated in any state. There's really no definition legally to what a coach is. And because of that, we have spiritual coaches, we have life coaches, we have health coaches. And because of that, people are able to take on that title and that responsibility with a client and maybe be ethical, but many times it creates a scenario where they can toe the line of ethical and unethical behavior because there's no governing board or there's no organization that is tracking, monitoring, educating, understanding, and standardizing what that care looks like. I think also having a deeper conversation about what the world of coaching in the United States looks like and how to regulate it. Because I think that's where, if you look at most of the high control groups that have really been highlighted over the last decade, so many of them have a huge coaching component in which, in order for you to join, you have to give your power away to someone who you are led to believe knows more than you, can help you more than you can help yourself. And don't get me wrong, therapists, doctors, nutrition professionals who are trained, educated, and have an oversight committee to their practice are great resources for people to improve their health and well-being in any of those areas. But the coaching world itself is not regulated. And because of that, there can be ascension coaches, there can be spiritual coaches, there can be life coaches, there can be MAP coaches, which are all terminologies that are related to the Twin Flames Universe group, that really there's little to no oversight. And I think that's a really hot point that also needs to be heavily looked at and established as well.
Yes, thank you. I actually have recently come across a new level of sort of horror for me, which is the industry of coaching geared towards cult survivors. And so these people are often charging more than your average therapist would charge, which is important because therapists, as you stated, do have the training and the background and the oversight committee and the supervisor and that thousands of hours of experience and the ability to be able to obviously this is this is a soapbox of mine, the ability to be able to look at a person in this room and see like that person's triggered right now in the most subtle ways, and where life coaches don't necessarily have that type of training. So I agree with you. How can communities, as in like your actual community that you live in, how can communities better support survivors like yourself? What can we do as a community, even online communities, however you consider a community, right? What can they do to better support you and people who are like you, whether you're a survivor directly or a secondary survivor? How can we better support you?
I think we kind of touched on this a little bit before too, but I just want to reiterate. I think it like Jesse said too, it comes down to education and just having that knowledge and that information out there. After the documentary came out, I know that there were Facebook groups that popped up claiming that they want to help expose the group or whatnot, but it really became more of a way to sit and judge the victims or judge what's going on. And there's a lot of, if I had a nickel for every time I heard, how gullible do you have to be? How stupid do you have to be? Who joins us? I would never fall for this. I think that education of understanding anybody can become susceptible to this. There are high control groups across the country, across the world, every day that I see people a part of that have similar or identical rhetoric to what Twin Flames Universe had. So I think I assume that people say that to themselves to make themselves feel better, like, well, it couldn't be me, to kind of distance themselves from it. But I think as a community, just learning how people fall for it, why it works, because again, we didn't go into it with the welcome mat saying, hey, we're going to change your sexual identity and take all your money and cut you off from your friends and family. Right. It started with, we have hope. You feel hopeless. We have a way for you to empower yourself through healing and releasing your trauma, and then good things will happen, which isn't a far-fetched belief. But that's rooted in truth, that like healing your trauma, healing your past issues will help you have a more stable relationship with yourself and with others. Sure. And so I think just that knowledge of trying to fully understand why people join and how people join, rather than judging or using it as a form of entertainment. Because again, then you shift the blame away from the perpetrators. You are now just solely blaming the victim. So we need to look at those reasons so that we can say, okay, how do we stop these people from preying on vulnerable people and communities? I think that would help a lot, because it would offer a support system for us and for people still in it trying to get out. Because shame is a motivator too. Like if you feel like you're just going to be shunned and shamed by people, you're not going to want to come out. You're not going to want to vocalize what abuse you endured. And so you stay silent. So that kind of behavior only, again, continues to help the abuser and hurt the survivors.
I was gonna say, if I had a nickel for how many times I said to myself how foolish I was for joining and how like stupid I was and things like that. It took a long time for me to like go over that hump of like, I'm not the stupidest person on earth. So as a survivor, I would say a good 2 years of intense therapy before I stopped blaming myself. I think having that support and having less of those people like spreading those myths around certainly can make the whole recovery process so much easier for many of us. Anyone want to add to all that?
I just want to reiterate how important that is, educating yourself. I think that it's almost impossible not to have experienced some form of coercion. And maybe if people understood what it was and what it looked like, they could find areas in their lives where they were coerced at one point or are being currently, and then they would be able to empathize and have more compassion and also motivation to help change these laws. I think Australia spent a good 5 years just educating the public on what even coercive control was. They did take some sort of survey and ask people before and after their educational campaign, and before almost no one understood, but once more and more people understood, I think over 50% of their population knew what it meant. I think that's really cool. I hope people take it seriously and educate themselves if you do know anyone going through something like that, because then you might be able to help them better and be more of a support person, and they'll feel more comfortable talking to you about it as well, because it can be really scary to talk about this stuff, and because we've all experienced some sort of judgment, even if it was just from our heads, right? We all know we said it all to ourselves already. So the less judgment the better.
Definitely can relate to that so hard. All right. The next question I have is, what role do you think survivors like yourself and others have in shaping policies?
I think talking about it, educating the public, being in docuseries that reaches larger audience, it helps kind of sprout about the ideas of needing policies and why we need those policies just by speaking about it from own experience.
Love that concept of sprouting. That's really cute. Thank you.
Without our voices, change can't happen, right? Because if everything's happening behind closed doors and the public facade that they put on is vastly different than the private conversations they're having with these cult members, that survivors have to share their story so that people are aware of what's happening and that communities can become informed in what's happening sometimes in their own backyard. That's a huge part of that. And having these communities, like if it is happening in your town, what can you do to stop it? How can you boycott? How can you raise awareness with your local politicians? But we just have to just keep sharing so that more people are aware, they're informed. We can only do so much by ourselves, but if we raise our voices, we have more people that can do the work with us and affect change on that level.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to add to this?
I think if I could just mention too, is just believing in survivors, just hearing them and believing them.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say that hearing someone else's journey and experience within a high control relationship, group, religion is what got them to wake up in their own situation. And so seeing the parallels from someone else's group and then seeing how that looks and feels in your own life can be literally life-changing for people. We do need to platform survivors more. We need to hear them, believe them, listen to them, and understand them, because I think the narrative, the firsthand experience is the way more powerful way of educating the public. It's not going to be so much about a policy, which that's important too, but it's more about that firsthand, this is what I went through, this is what I experienced, in order to get other people to truly understand. And so I really appreciate everyone here and everyone who participated in both of the documentaries about Twin Flames universe, but also all the NXIVM coverage and things too. That was instrumental. So just like Jesse was saying, the more eyes on this story is what's needed. So grateful that this is still a conversation. We're coming up on almost the 1-year anniversary of this documentary coming out in November 8th. What a great time to have this kind of conversation. So thank you.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that question?
I think the more people are aware of like our stories and stuff and seeing how it all relates, and even they can possibly relate to it in some way, I think it could also maybe make someone who's, I'm not saying like go out and start a cult, but it might make someone think twice about who they're trusting and also making the decision to form, like, I love that you brought up life coaching. That's a great example of just something completely regulated out there that might make me, me, for example, will be like, you know what? I don't know that I'm going to go pay for something like that, because I've heard these survivors and they've made great points on why this is not a good idea. And also, like, from my background in public health, I know that we have regulated facilities for a reason. You're not going to go eat at the person who's cooking food down the road from you and serving it and paying for it versus the facility that's being regulated. So it's the same thing in this front as well, is just trusting anyone and just getting that message out and maybe helping the education from that standpoint.
So let's now move into closing remarks, unless anyone wants to add anything to that. Yeah, okay. My ADHD brain caught up with me. So, all right. So, first of all, I wanted to thank our guests, our Twin Flames Universe survivors, and our, what we call in the victim services field, our secondary survivors. It is wonderful to have you here and to have your voices. Mrs. G, I know you didn't get to speak too much, but feel free if you'd like to continue speaking. But if not, do you want to say anything, Mrs. G?
I just wanted to say it was so nice to see everybody, and their comments really were wonderful, and that I hope that the coming up of the Netflix Emmy brings more awareness, and that more of these talks can bring up more awareness as well, and that we can maybe possibly not only help the survivors who oh my gosh, you guys are so brave, but even people that have like left and are still kind of like not knowing where they're going, and they're in like a limbo right now because they've left maybe the Twin Flames, but they're really not back with family, and they're somewhere in that middle, and they don't know where to like find those resources to maybe help them as well. So God bless everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. So yes, thank you everyone for coming and blessing us with the gift of your story. It has been my honor to speak with you all, and I wish I would have reached out to you all sooner. So the most important thing I want you all to take away from here is that we can create policy. We can lift our voices. We absolutely can make this happen for all victims and survivors of cults. And we can help be a strong voice for the people who are still in cults. We can be that light for them, and we can be the loving and accepting person and the loving, accepting voice, just like we talked about when, Paula and others posted that gave people hope. It gave people truth, like a real truth to point to. And so as long as we're caring, accepting, warm, loving, and truthful, I believe that we can be a source of light for people, and in policy and in law. And we have to come together and do the letter writing and do the contacting people, and or facilitate that in any way that you can. Does anyone else want to have one last sentence of hope to leave for people?
Well, Tabby, Cecilia was able to jump on, so I don't know if maybe she wants to.
Yeah, would you like to speak?
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see everyone together. I just want to say that whenever you're together and using your voices, I think it's so powerful. And Tabby, I'm so proud of you for the work you're doing.
So today we talked about our experiences, or the shared experiences here in the Twin Flame survivors, and the secondary victims or survivors, if you will, that are also here visiting us. We talked about what policies could have helped if they were in place, what community supports and structures that can make things better for us as we move through the process of recovery, how we can actually reach the other victims that are still involved in these groups. We talked about the magic question, which is if we woke up tomorrow and there were already policies and laws in place, all this would be criminalized and people would be protected. What would that look like? And we talked about that being coercion would be illegal, having high control groups in general would be illegal, and being able to support people, it would be automatically in place. And finally, we talked about how survivors can be involved in making change happen and making policy happen. We also talked about what was really special and helpful to us as we move through our recovery process. A lot of that was like seeing seeing light, seeing truth, because part of the coercion process that is frequently coupled with coercive control, or frequently coupled with the abuse that occurs, is an element of truth. The main reason why they can get all of us, which many of us are very educated, is that they use partial truths or partial real psychology or partial whatever in order to rope us in and then fill the rest of it with things that maybe are not true or only true for them in that circumstance. So when you see someone else who's sharing that spirit of care and love and hope and actual truth, it can be that source of light leading people away from the high control group. Now, one thing that everyone pretty much agreed with is if you are in a high control group, give yourself, like, how can it hurt, right? Take a few steps away. It was helpful to stop watching the videos. It was helpful to stop messaging on the forum and things like that, to give yourself a vacation so that you can clear the air and retrain yourself back again for, if we don't want to call it critical thinking, if we're still like, I am a critical thinker. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. We want to call it for a vacation from your current thinking to allow the what if questions, right? So there should be no harm in asking what if. Okay. And and I think we all can agree with that, right? If there is harm in asking what if, that's probably a good red flag.
Yes, I mean, of course, and it's great to see the family members on here as well as the former members.
Yes. And for those in the future, this is recorded, so you will be able to hear it. But Cecilia, and along with her wonderful team, Inbel and Morgan, are the producers of Twin Flames Universe.
Twin Flames.
Yes. Escaping Twin Flames, that's what it is. So, which is the Netflix documentary that came out with all of these wonderful people here.
Well, I wanted to chime in because you asked if there was like a little bit of hope to leave for people that are in or people that have loved ones in. And I think for me, I believe just like anybody is susceptible to falling into a cult, I believe anybody can also empower themselves to leave it too. I don't think anybody's beyond hope when it comes to leaving a cult or a high control group. But I think too, for the ones that are in it, I've had people message me that were still in the group and they were on the fence at that time and they didn't know what to do and they didn't know what to think or believe. And there's just so much fear of what lays beyond the door when you walk out of it. And I think it's just important to remember that we're here speaking not because we're haters, not because we want to harm anybody or we don't have ill will. There are people that I still care about in that group that I was friends with and I considered friends. We shared a lot. And it's just, you don't like the fear of I'm going to lose all of my good when I leave. That's a lie. And I think it's important. And I shared with this person in particular that there's good to be had outside of it. All of the things that you wanted in your life are still there for you and you have control over it. You don't have somebody else controlling how it comes to you, what it looks like. You get to say what it looks like. And I think that's important to remember, that it's scary and it's an unknown, and people are financially vulnerable to this group now because their sole income is through this group, which is why resources and support is so important while you're trying to leave. But I just will always impress upon the point that there's good to be had, and there's love and money and freedom, all of the things that they tell us we'll never get. Your life doesn't end when you leave Twin Flames Universe. Your life actually is your own once you leave Twin Flames Universe.
Thank you. That's so wonderful. It's making me tear up, but yes. And any high control group for that matter. Yeah, I can't follow that up with anything any better. Okay. Well, thank you. I will go ahead and end the recording now, but thank you all for joining us.